You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have some unfortunate, albeit predictable news. According to reporting, Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are keeping their children home and reporting damage to their property as anti-immigrant conspiracy theories that were fanned by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance continue to spread. So right off the bat, knowing that they were perpetuating this type of disinformation, knowing that they were spreading rumors that there was no basis for, is there any legal exposure that they carry by virtue of doing that, seeing that the result of that now is damage to property and probably harm to the lives of these immigrants in Ohio?
You know, Brian, my gut reaction, if I had to give a snap answer, is it's very unlikely to be anything that the folks who are now being victimized by Donald Trump's garbage that he just spewed into the public square during the debate, there's very little chance there will be any legal recourse for the victims Donald Trump has just created with his bullshit, which is what that is. When I heard him say that on the debate, and then you look into some of the reporting, and it looks like these allegations of people eating pets comes from a Facebook post in which the person who made the post said, "My neighbor's friend's daughter said."
Right.
And Donald Trump spits that garbage out into the public square. And what happens? Violence ensues. My mind immediately went back to our Asian American brothers and sisters here who were attacked, who were assaulted, who were endangered by Donald Trump's, calling COVID-19 the Kung flu and blaming China, or frankly, any old Asians will do in Donald Trump's estimation. Get after them. That's what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance do to the American people. Set them up to be harmed simply for what they perceive as a political point. And you can tell my blood pressure is up and I'm angry. And the fact that somebody who's running for president is willing to so casually and recklessly and falsely endanger American lives tells you everything you need to know about whether that man is worthy of your vote, and he's not.
It's not just willingness. That is the cornerstone of his campaign. It is pitting his largely white base against anybody who doesn't look like them, who doesn't sound like them, who doesn't pray like them, who doesn't love like them. That is the cornerstone. That is the foundation of today's MAGA Republican Party. And, it's a sad testament to the fact that they have to use this tactic, use pitting people against other people to distract from their own glaring lack of any agenda, or when it is an agenda, it's one that's so aggressively unpopular that of course people wouldn't vote for them. And so this is the only thing that they have to fall back on. It is a sad state of the Republican Party today. Glenn, I think what this made me think of is kind of the old, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. At what point does free speech end and legal exposure begin for saying something that is going to incite some degree of violence here?
Yeah, the Supreme Court has told us. There's a case called Brandenburg, which takes on the admittedly difficult, thorny area of where does free speech end and unprotected speech that is likely to incite violence begin. That line couldn't be any murkier, and anytime these kind of cases make their way through the courts, they are intensely fact-specific. There are no absolutes, there are no bright lines. But essentially, the First Amendment does not protect speech that is intended to result in, inspiring folks to imminent violence, that is reasonably likely to result in imminent violence, and ultimately for these suits to be brought, you may not actually need that imminent violence to play out, but ordinarily it does, and that's how these suits are born. So I can only say, Brian, I do not pretend to be an expert civil litigator. I'm not. I never litigated civil cases. I was a criminal prosecutor for 30 years. So, when that violence results and it is an assault, I am more concerned with applying the laws of the jurisdiction in which the assault occurred to see who can be held accountable. Let me back up and take COVID as an example. I maintained all along as a former homicide prosecutor for 22 years that when Donald Trump lied to the American people about just how deadly the coronavirus was. And he admitted that he lied. He downplayed it. What he did was he endangered the lives of those who believed that it was going to go away like a miracle when the weather warmed up. And they made their sort of behavioral and health decisions accordingly. When Donald Trump stood up in the Rose Garden and told a reporter, Jeff Mason, take the mask off, and when he said, no, sir, I'm going to protect my health, he said, oh, you're just being politically correct. What message did Donald Trump send? He sent a message to his supporters that you are worthy of being mocked if you choose the political correct route of wearing a mask to prevent becoming infected. So what the law says, not to turn this into a legal breakdown, Crim Law 101 class, but what the law says under those circumstances is if you, Donald Trump, engaged in a grossly negligent act, or you had a duty to act, like to protect the American people, and you engaged in gross negligence in failing to perform that duty, and your reckless or grossly negligent act was reasonably likely to result in harm to another, you can be held accountable. I believe he could have been held legally accountable for avoidable COVID deaths, and I hope there are some expert litigators who are now willing to take on the cause of the victims Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have just created in our Haitian brothers and sisters who are now being attacked, having their property damaged or destroyed because of Donald Trump's reckless lies.
Glenn, at what point does Donald Trump lose his plausible deniability that what he's doing is not inciting violence after it's incited violence against Asian people during COVID, after it's incited his own supporters to commit the events of January 6th, and now, after his words, are inciting violence against Haitians? Doesn't he lose that plausible deniability that, oh, I didn't know that it was gonna that my incitements against these specific communities were gonna result in any violence against them, because it's already done it, because he's done the exact same thing over and over and over?
Yeah, it's a great question. He has no plausible deniability. Don't take it from me, Brian. Take it from the appellate court judges. I was sitting in the courtroom watching Donald Trump's lawyers argue in one of the oral arguments in his appeal in his D.C. criminal case, watching his lawyers argue, well, Your Honor, Donald Trump doesn't bear responsibility for what his supporters do after he says something, and the judge stopped him dead in his tracks and said, don't give me that. I'm paraphrasing now. Don't give me that. Donald Trump issues statements and violence ensues. There is obviously a causal connection. Donald Trump has no plausible deniability. Of course, the only way to test it is to bring cases, litigate cases, and try to hold Donald Trump accountable for the harm he's inflicting on Americans and beyond Americans, immigrants. And I don't care, frankly, if you're documented, undocumented. Donald Trump has no right to endanger their lives, even if they happen to be undocumented immigrants. But Donald Trump gets away with just about everything.
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth it to bring these kind of stories into the spotlight and at least bring up the prospect of any legal exposure that he might have. And if there are any civil litigators out there who want to represent these people, look, it's no secret what Donald Trump is doing. It's no secret what J.D. Vance is doing. J.D. Vance himself was asked point blank why he was perpetuating stories about which there was no evidence. And he gave some roundabout answer about how, there could be, and they do the whole Tucker Carlson, we're just asking questions thing to try to give themselves a little bit of plausible deniability. But we're seeing today the natural conclusion, the obvious natural conclusion of the words that these kind of people spew between Trump and Vance and the rest of the Republican Party, who, again, needs to latch on to destroying the lives of other people to try and scare their overwhelmingly white base into being too afraid to go outside, and that's why you need to vote for Donald Trump. It is a campaign solely, specifically predicated on fear. So, of course, we'll stay on top of this story in case there are any updates. For those watching right now, if you want to support our work, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our channels. The links to both of them are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.